I learned how silence could be louder than any confession on the night my phone lit up with a picture that did not belong in my life. A hand I didn't recognize on a shoulder I knew better than my own. A careless smile in a place where promises were supposed to live. I left before sunrise, not because I wanted revenge, but because the ache felt like smoke inside my lungs and I needed air. I vanished into a town that didn't know my name, certain I'd never turn back, until she found me. Before the picture, there was a rhythm to ordinary days that felt like a lullaby I didn't question. Mornings began with the hum of the kettle, the tremor of an old fridge, the two soft thuds of our neighbor taking the stairs like each step scolded his knees. I ran a small restoration studio, salvaging wooden furniture from auctions and garage sales, sanding away strangers' fingerprints to coax the grain back to life. She worked at a consulting firm that sold order to chaotic companies, and at night she brought home acronyms like souvenirs, KPIs, churn, scope, words that made a private logic of the world. We were a couple that loved quietly. Neither of us staged grand gestures for screens. We celebrated in whispers, counted small wins, let the world chatter beyond glass. We had moved to a neighborhood that smiled in brochures, tree-lined streets, seasonal banners, a farmer's market on weekends where children swirled around a saxophonist and couples shared peaches like soft secrets. It was a city that prided itself on being woke, where murals announced justice in saturated colors and coffee shops added $1 to cappuccinos. For the cause, while security guards watched me longer than the espresso dripped. I had learned to navigate it all with muscle memory. The store clerk who needed my card checked twice, the apartment tours where the leasing agent emphasized quiet neighbors, and community fit. The job interview once lost because I was overqualified, then later won by a colleague with fewer years and a different shade of skin. These things accumulated like fine dust. You only notice dust when the light slants the right way, otherwise it just settles in your lungs and makes you tired. She understood, or said she did, and most days that soothed me. She'd take my hand when a server looked past me and ask her questions to the air. She'd draw little maps of fairness in her notebook margins. I saw a future that involved a small house full of repaired things and new beginnings, with rings and careful plans and children raised to recognize both grace and its absence. I believed in that future the way wood believes in the possibility of shine beneath varnish. The picture arrived on a Tuesday when the city rain had finally found us after weeks of evasive forecasts. My phone glowed on the workbench while I bent over a 19th-century dresser whose warped drawers resisted my patience. The screen showed a friend's name, a message, a photo, her at a rooftop bar with glass and skyline, a hand anchoring her waist that wasn't mine. The smile wasn't reckless. It was relieved, like a burden had been put down on a table and forgotten. I didn't explode. I didn't interrogate. I folded into the quiet that had kept me safe in rooms that misunderstood me. That night, while she slept, I packed clothes, a chisel set I trusted, the old pocket plane my father had pressed into my palm when I was 15, a few books that could bear rereading. Dawn hadn't made its case yet when I locked the door behind me and left the keys under the mat like a surrender flag. I drove until the city's voice turned to static, and then I drove farther, into a town that did not know the tune of my name. I told no one. That was the point. To become heir. To learn if I could be okay without explanations. To see what I was when I was not orbiting her. The town I chose had a single main street and a second, shyer one that pretended not to be there. It wore its history in hand-painted signs and chipped brick, and it carried its cruelties in polite forms. A barber shop that greeted everyone by name except me, a hardware store with a bell that rang differently when I walked in, a library where the volunteer smiled as if sympathy were a bandage. But there were also people who learned me with time. Mrs. Green, who ran the thrift store and insisted I take the wobbly chairs that no one else wanted. Ramon, who sharpened blades on Thursdays and talked to them like they were birds. The night janitor at the elementary school who saved me scrap wood in neat bundles, tied with blue string. I rented a room above the florist. The ceiling slanted like a shrugged shoulder, and in deep rain the roof tapped a rhythm that felt like company. I secured odd jobs and slowly, then steadily, began to repair the town's forgotten things: porch swings that sagged in the middle like old stories, dining tables scarred by generations of plates and elbows, rocking chairs that complained in the same register as their owners' knees. I didn't explain why I had come. It was easy not to in a place where everyone thought they already knew. What I couldn't sand away was the way I kept listening for her in the shape of silence. I found her in absent choreography, the half-turn I used to make to pass her the salt, the street corners that felt like our walking pace, the ghost warmth on the other pillow when I woke suddenly. Memory is a craftsman too. It keeps shaping what you believe even when you've hidden its tools. The town held festivals for reasons it barely remembered. Summer brought a heritage parade where floats rolled by, each pretending the world had always been friendly. Banners stitched words like unity and pride above faces like mine that they never included when decisions were made. A committee asked me to refurbish the old reviewing platform because the wood had rotted at the edges. I replaced boards in the late afternoons, sweat cooling into salt patterns on my back, while teenagers practiced a dance they'd learned from a screen. It was at that platform that injustice came out from under its dust. The parade master, a man whose grandfather's name was on a plaque, watched me work and decided to test the limits of his ownership. He questioned the quality of my boards, then the sourcing of my lumber, then the integrity of my measurements, and when I showed receipts and exact angles, he moved his line to presence itself. He asked for my permit as though labor required papers. He suggested I leave it to one of us. The librarian, who was also a historian and an ally in ways that knew the weight of proof, overheard and quietly handed him the contract signed by his own committee. He muttered a tight apology that felt like a stone skimming water, fast, shallow, gone. Small humiliations have a way of splintering larger ones. That night, in my slanted room, I stared at the ceiling and realized betrayal had braided itself across more than just one rooftop bar photo. It reached into the daily decisions of who gets believed, who gets paid, who gets to carry the clipboard. I had left because of love's fracture. I stayed gone because I was learning how power fractures too. On an ordinary Thursday, laundry hung to dry, soup simmering, plain iron honed to a reflection. Someone knocked. Footsteps paused, a paper slid under the door, and the footsteps retreated down the breathy hall. I waited, heart drumming its Morse code. The paper was a postcard of a lighthouse we once visited when wind pushed gulls sideways. The message was undramatic and careful, telling me she knew she'd broken the home she'd built with my hands, that the city was uninhabitable without the sound of my laughter, that she would not ask forgiveness but needed to return my name to me if I'd let her. At the bottom was a number, and a plea that did not use the word please. I turned the card over. The lighthouse was small, stubborn against gray. I placed it on the windowsill next to the blue string. Weeks went by. Then my phone rang. Her voice on the phone was not the voice in the photo, not the voice in the apartment where we once negotiated which lamp made a kinder circle of light. It was quieter, the surface of a lake after wind leaves. She didn't ask me to come back. She said she'd come to me. I told her the name of the town because the truth had started to taste better than survival, and the following Sunday, she arrived on a bus that breathed like an animal and dislodged tourists with cameras they would point at anything labeled quaint. I met her outside the florist's because the air smelled like eucalyptus and apology. We did not embrace. We stood with the knowledge that we had both curated versions of each other from distance. Without speech, we walked. Past the hardware store that rang its different bell, past the barber shop with its polite exclusions, past the reviewing platform I had made strong again. I took her to my studio, a converted garage with a skylight that taught wood to glow. She watched my hands at the bench, maybe remembering that these hands had once held not only tools but her face. In the silence, I allowed the questions to rise like heat. Had the affair been a reflex, a test, a boredom, an exit sign she pretended not to read? Had the city's glass towers whispered to her that she could be a person who did not need the gravity of the life we had built? Had the world's old hierarchies offered her a pass? She did not answer because I did not ask with words, and I did not ask with words because I knew I did not want the anatomy of betrayal. I wanted the geography of repair or its impossibility. We walked to the heritage platform because if we were going to speak, we should do so in a place that had tried to keep me small. The parade master was there, measuring distances between rows of folding chairs, considering symmetry like it was a moral stance. He looked up, saw us, and performed courtesy as theater. He thanked me again for the replacement boards, noted their durability, then asked my companion if she was enjoying their little slice of America. It was an old trick, redirect the conversation to comfort the comfortable, and I felt something in me unspool. I told him the platform would outlive his courtesy. I told him the wood held the memory of the hands that worked it and the feet that would stand on it, and that the town's history included segments it liked to crop out when making festival posters. The librarian walked up, as if summoned by a shared chord, and nodded, adding that the archives held letters from families shoved to the edge of maps, from workers paid in promises, from names uninscribed because ink was rationed by power. The parade master offered small words in return, the kind that sound like policy but are only weather. In that moment, without speeches and without witnesses chosen by algorithm, I said goodbye to the fear that my disappearance had made me less than myself. I had left to breathe. I had returned because breathing meant using the air for something. I turned to the woman who had changed my life story with a single image and recognized that she had also traveled to a difficult place, the interior country where contrition is not a currency but a discipline. We were standing on what I had rebuilt in a town I had survived while learning the texture of its lies. Whatever came next would be chosen, not drifted into. She looked at me, and though no words passed, I understood this. She had been unfaithful not out of spectacle but out of weakness, the kind that avoids telling the truth that it is lonely, the kind that tests boundaries because it mistrusts its own impulses. I could not unlearn the photograph, but I could decide whether my life after it would be defined by a single rooftop or by the entire sky. Forgiveness is often mistaken for the soft furniture of a comfortable life. It is not. It is carpentry. It requires measurements, fits, shims, a tolerance for imperfections, and a respect for the materials you are working with. You can build a bridge with it, but only if both sides agree that gravity exists. We did not move back into our old apartment with its familiar indentations and its ghosts of ordinary days. Instead, she rented a small place near the bus depot for a month and learned the map of this town that had mispronounced me. She watched me work, not like an admirer but like a student preparing to contribute. We structured our days with care. In the mornings I showed her the ritual of sharpening, slow, even strokes, water glistening on the stone, the patient angle that decides whether a blade will sing or scrape. In the afternoons she volunteered at the library, digitizing letters that recorded lives the parades forgot. She found a letter by a man whose great-grandchildren now ran a bakery, the handwriting steady even as he described being turned away from a union meeting because his voice was not the correct heritage for solidarity. She read town ordinances from a century ago and understood how the present had been engineered over time, one rule, one eligibility, one clause at a time. In the evenings we walked without agenda. We saw the ways in which a place can apologize through people rather than proclamations. Mrs. Green gave her a bag of mismatched teacups and said their chipped lines were maps of honesty. Ramon let her try the wheel once and laughed when she overcompensated and made sparks. The janitor told her that schools were where the future learned the script, and she nodded like someone hearing a truth that could no longer be outsourced to belief. There were setbacks. I felt my ribs press against memory some nights, a hollowness that had nothing to do with hunger. She flinched at sirens in a town where sirens meant oversights, then repairs, then a return to pretending. We argued without raising our voices, because we were only allowed narration now. There was no theater left between us. Once, she suggested we could start over somewhere else, a clean city without murals pretending that paint could keep promises, and I understood that she was offering a form of flight. I told her that justice was not a location but a practice, and that if we were to be anything, we had to learn to stand still with the consequences. On a Sunday, the parade wound through town. The platform held. The teenagers danced a choreography that had migrated through screens into muscle. The librarian read names from the archives aloud between floats, seamstresses, porters, strikebreakers turned organizers, banjo players whose songs were borrowed then sold, teachers who taught in basements after daylight said no. The parade master nodded along, constrained by the fact of information. It wasn't a revolution. But the sound of names reclaimed a portion of the air. We stood at the edge, anonymous as weather. She slipped a folded piece of paper into my palm. It was a letter addressed to me, written in the same careful ink she had once used to annotate articles. She did not ask for anything inside it. She described, instead, what she had learned, that betrayal is not only a broken promise between two people but an inheritance delivered by systems that value convenience over courage, that love without accountability is merely sentiment, that silence can be both sanctuary and erasure, that leaving had been an act of survival and finding me had been an act of respect. She said she would carry the work forward whether or not I remained beside her. I read it twice. Then I put it in the small drawer of my workbench, where I keep the tools I reach for most often. We did not declare a victory. We simply chose a next day. Months later, I began to take commissions again from the city we had left. Not from corporations that issued diversity statements in brand colors, but from families who had inherited tables and needed them strong because children were finally sleeping through the night. We moved to a modest place equidistant from the town and the city. A house with a yard where the soil kept surprising us with objects, bottle caps, an old spoon, a marble with a chipped swirl, reminders that ground is a library if you know how to read it. Some nights, when the wind cooperates, we can hear the train and the ocean arguing softly in the distance, as if deciding which voice will carry our story. We are not the couple we were. We are not a cautionary tale either. We are a pair of people who understand that love can be both scaffold and boundary, that justice can be intimate work, that betrayal can expose a person's truest coordinates. I am not grateful for the pain, but I am grateful for the clarity it insisted on. I did not return to the version of myself that left before sunrise. I returned to the self who refuses to be curated by harm. If you have ever looked at a single image and felt the ground tilt, know this. You are allowed to disappear to save your breath, and you are allowed to return on your own terms. The work is ordinary and relentless. Like sharpening a blade, it is also holy in a way that requires no cathedral. The question that remains, one that I ask myself still, on mornings when the kettle hums and the light slants just so, is simple and impolite. What are you building now that will outlast the version of you who was hurt? And will it be strong enough to hold not just you, but others who have been told they are only guests in their own lives?